Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Dentist Show. I'm Gary Takas, your podcast co-host. The episode that we have for you today is titled Team and Systems Calibration. We thought this was especially important at this time in our profession because many of you have new team members and important to have a calibrated team. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Hey, before we get to that podcast episode, a couple of announcements. The first one coming up on September 19th, 20th, and 21st is our next Thriving Dentist MBA live stream workshop. That one, our MBA, is 9 hours of CE spread over 3 evenings. So 3 hours an evening for 3 consecutive evenings. You'll get 9 hours of CE. In that MBA, I go through the 10 elements of a thriving practice. These elements provide the foundation for developing an amazing practice. I would encourage you to attend. We do limit attendance because I run it more like a workshop than a lecture. And so we do limit attendance. And the advantage here in the live stream format is that you can attend from the convenience of your home or office. However, we do it live. This is not recorded. We do it live, which means you'll have the ability to ask questions to make that content as applicable to you as possible. Very inexpensive, maybe the least expensive 9 hours of CE that you'll ever obtain. Come join us. You can register for that MBA by going to thrivingdentist.com/MBA. Hey, we'll look forward to seeing you there. I think you'll get an awful lot out of that. If you like this podcast, you're going to love that MBA live stream workshop. The second announcement that I have is we have a tip from a returning guest, Dr. Eric Block. And Eric's going to talk to you about how to re-energize your practice and career with dental implants. Eric's got a great message. He just published a book all about incorporating dental implants in a general practice. And I think you're going to love his messaging. Without any further ado, here's Dr. Eric Block.
Hey, Gary, this is Dr. Eric Block coming at you with a clinical tip. I actually just finished my second book called Stress-Free Dental Implants, Re-Energize Your Career with Implants, which is now available on Amazon. And I wanted to talk about how guided implantology has been one of the biggest game changers for me in my practice. I've been doing implants for almost 20 years, and initially I started out using 2D technology and freehanding all of my implant surgeries. But now I've totally switched to 3D technology and guided implantology. And what used to be one of the more stressful procedures in my day-to-day general practice, now implants have become one of the least stressful procedures I do all day. And what I do is I take a CBCT and a trio scan of the patient during the consultation, and I'll merge them together. And I'll actually do this right in front of the patient. And they are super wowed by the technology. And I will virtually plan the implant right in front of them on the virtual planning software. And I'll show them where the implant's going to go in the bone, and I'll even put a little fake crown on it, and I'll explain the whole implant process. And this is also a great time for me to see if this is actually a case that I feel comfortable doing or not. If it's not, then I'll refer it out to a colleague. But about 95% of the time, I am comfortable, and I will proceed with the implant. The patient will head off to the front desk and schedule the appointment. And later that afternoon, on my new Einstein printer, I will 3D print a surgical guide, which is essentially just a large pilot hole. So when it comes time to the actual surgery, most of the work has already been done. I place my surgical guide that I printed up, and I drill through the tube, and I have a large pilot hole. And from there, I just widen the osteotomy. I use a very simple flap design and simple suture design. And patients are in and out of there in 40 minutes, and they are just wowed by how quick and efficient it was. And they tell their friends and family. So I feel like, trying a new treatment modality like implants is a great way to get out of that hamster wheel of general dentistry. So I tell all the dentists out there to find a new treatment modality, get educated, hone those skills, and you can totally re-energize your career. Not to mention, it's a great revenue. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's Eric Block at info@thestressfreedentist.com. Thanks so much.
Welcome back to the Thriving Dentist Coaching in Action segment. We have an amazing topic today, but before we get into this today's Coaching in Action segment, I want to take a moment to thank Eric for his wonderful tip. You're going to enjoy it, and hopefully you can apply some of his tips with regards to implants in your practice. So hope you get value from it. My name is Naren. I'm your co-host. Team and systems calibration. Wonderful topic. Business is something that's never done. A practice is something that's never done. It always keeps changing. It changes because things outside of our control are changing, or we want to keep making it better. So for those two reasons, it's always changing. And one of the things that, Gary notices in his work as a coach with many, many clients all across the US is many practices are bringing in new team members. When you bring in somebody new or multiple people who are new, now it kind of messes with the equilibrium. It kind of messes with the way things are being done. So you have to recalibrate. You have to recalibrate both how the people work, as well as recalibrate that in the context of systems you may already have in place. So this is a wonderful, timely episode given the times we live in, with a lot of change, a lot of both changes brought on by the practice owners as well as changes brought on by a tight labor market. So Gary, let's dive in.
Yeah, and Aaron, you set that up really well. Calibration, I'll start with team calibration, team member calibration, and then we'll get into systems calibration. But let's start with team. And I think it's especially applicable now because of the fact that many of our listeners have new team members. That's been a dynamic that has sort of been a byproduct of COVID-19 and lots of different factors. But many practices have new team members. And we have to realize that team development is a dynamic process. It's not a static process. It's not something you can set it and forget it. I mean, I wish it was. I wish we could, set it and forget it. One of our goals, goal number 4 with our clients, is to have a high performance team that we truly love and enjoy working with. By the way, I crafted that statement. A high performance team is to have a high performance team that we truly love and enjoy working with. And I use the word love because I really want you to love your team members. I want you to think of them as your work family. You're going to spend more time with them than you are your family. So I want to have some great people around you. And notice that the first part of that goal is to have a high performance team. And again, a high performance team is not one you can just set and forget. It's one that we have to continually refine and continually work on. And calibration is really important. We have to calibrate periodically because it's entirely possible to get out of calibration to where things aren't quite firing on all cylinders. And as opposed to if it is calibrated, it's amazing to see the differences that we can get when you, doctor or doctors, if we have multiple doctors in your practice, and your team members are all on the same page. So let me kind of dive into this team calibration. And let me talk about some applications for this and how you might incorporate calibrating in your practice in a practical way and work on it on kind of an ongoing basis. Well, doctor, anytime you go out and take CE, and whether it's to continue your skills relative to something you're already doing in your practice, like for example, maybe cosmetic dentistry is an important part of your practice. But now you've gone out and taken a course by, say, Dr. David Hornbrook, his live patient course up in Utah. And now you're excited, more excited than ever, about incorporating all the new things you learned from Dr. Hornbrook and Dr. Mark Montgomery and Dee Dee Reed. And you can't wait to apply that in your practice. But you only took your assistant to that course. Excuse me, if you notice my voice is a little bit hoarse, I've got one of those Scottsdale summer colds, going from indoors where it's 72 degrees to outdoors where it's 115. This usually happens once a summer for me. So I've got one of those summer colds. My voice sounds a little bit froggy. Hopefully you can bear with it. Sorry about that. But let's say you've gone out and taken David's course, and now you can't wait to go out back in your practice and even do more smile design cases. Well, other than the assistant that you took to that course, the rest of the team really didn't, they weren't there. They didn't see all of it. And so now we got to calibrate the rest of the team to what you've learned and how excited you are about that in the practice. So anytime you go out and you take a course when maybe it's expanding something you're already doing, like the example I used with cosmetic dentistry, or perhaps you're going to introduce something new. Let me give you an example of that. Maybe you've decided that this is the year that you're going to begin to incorporate diagnosing and treating obstructive sleep apnea with appliance therapy. And as you go down your CE journey, we've got to somehow bring that back to the rest of our team. And we have to get the entire team on board. What you'll find is that the more that the entire team is on the same page, the more success you're going to have with leveraging that in your practice. Leveraging is so important here. And if we can get everyone on board, then you're going to have a lot more success with building those parts of your practice that you're excited about. So calibration. Now, if you're a regular listener, you know that in my coaching work, we teach the concept of 3 meetings are necessary for a thriving practice. 3 types of meetings. Let me walk through those meetings, and then we'll tie this in together how we do team calibration. The 3 meetings are, number 1, a morning huddle. I believe strongly in the value of a properly run morning huddle. It's a 7-minute meeting. It's not any longer than that. That allows you to essentially plan your day and troubleshoot your day so you can be most effective. At 7 minutes every morning at Life Smiles, we do that at 6:45 in the morning. Our first patient's at 7 o'clock. 7-minute meeting, morning huddle. The second type of meeting that we teach is what we would normally call the regular staff meeting. I've never liked the term staff. Naren, you've heard me joke about that. Yes. Staff is either a stick or it's an infection. Wait a minute, I guess you spell that differently. But I like to call it team. So it's regular team meeting. And you can do that however you like, but I'll share how we do it and what we teach our clients. We found that an hour a week is appropriate. We always have to balance our need to be doing patient care with developing the practice, right? And it's a delicate balancing act because we can't spend hours and hours and hours and hours training and calibrating and have a successful practice. Because at some point we actually have to take care of patients. Does that make any sense, Naren?
Absolutely, Gary. So the way I look at calibration, it's like the glue, right? It's the team is doing all the magic, but you need to make sure the team which is doing all the magic is getting enough time and attention so it can, play the A game regardless of the changes, regardless of the new players or new faces.
Well, and there's a saying that comes to mind here that applies here. And I've heard many dentists express this frustration. And I'll now coin it in a phrase. And the phrase is that you're spending so much time working in your practice that you have no time to work on your practice.
Yes.
That comes, I first learned it from Stephen Covey.
Me too.
In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. His epic book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And habit number 7, he called it sharpening the saw. And the analogy that he used in that is that imagine going back 120 years ago, and you were a lumberjack, and your job was to cut down trees. And you made more money if you cut down more trees. And the dilemma was, imagine that, and by the way, the technology back then was a 2-person buck saw. You've seen cartoons on that where one person pulls, the other one person pushes, the other one pulls, and they go back and forth chopping down the tree. Now imagine that your saw was dull. It needs to be sharpened because you've been cutting down so many trees. You've worn down the sharpness of the teeth on the blade. So the question is, do you take the time to sharpen the saw? And that's an exercise that would take some time. Do you take the time to get your files out and sharpen the saw? Or do you say, no, I've got so many trees to cut down, I have no time to sharpen the saw? Which would be more effective if you just keep using the dull saw and just keep kind of, nibbling away at the tree with the dull saw? Or do you realize, wait a minute, I'd be much more productive if I took a few minutes and sharpened the saw before we just go into cutting the trees? And of course, Stephen Covey would tell you that the latter is the better choice. Take the time to sharpen the blades, the saw blades, so that you're more effective. And the same thing happens that if we don't calibrate your team, you've got dull saw blades.
I think in that book, I still remember vividly, Stephen Covey says, these people are cutting, and it's taking hours. And so somebody says, why don't you take in the minute to sharpen the snow, take some time to sharpen the snow? And they're like, oh, I'm busy cutting the tree.
I'm too busy cutting the tree.
Too busy cutting the tree. And it makes the obvious point that, you can now cut the same tree in half the time if you take that extra half an hour to sharpen the saw.
And so let's extend that to dentistry. And there's some dentists that think, I've got so many patients. I'm so busy, taking care of my patients. We have no time to figure out how to do things more effectively.
Yes.
So you're so busy working in your practice that you don't spend any time working on it. Well, let's go back to the 3 meetings. We got the morning huddle, and then the other is a regular team meeting. Now, an hour a week is what I think is a nice balance between what is practical and effective. It's a nice balance. Now, in my own practice, LifeSmiles, we did not have success with the 1 hour team meeting. It was a lunch meeting, and what invariably would happen is the morning would run over and kind of eat into the meeting time, and then the afternoon would start a little bit early. And what was supposed to be a 1 hour team meeting ended up getting very compressed and not very effective. So we made a change and decided to do a meeting every other week, but make it 2 hours. Make it 2 hours every other week. It's the same hour a week, but now it's every other week for 2 hours. And that's been a lot more effective for us. So if you struggle with doing a weekly team meeting because of the same challenge that we have, maybe a little pivot to doing that team meeting 2 hours every other week would be more effective. It's proven to be a lot more effective for us. And then the third type of meeting that I teach my clients is a meeting that we do semi-annually. We do it twice a year. And it's an all-day meeting. Well, it's an all-day block of time. Let me break that down. It's an all-day block of time. And the way I recommend you do that is in the morning, 8 to noon, you actually do a team meeting where we have an agenda and we have structure to that. So no patients that day. And we go 8 to noon. And then in the afternoon, what I recommend, now stick with me on this, in the afternoon, what we do is we go out and do something fun together as a team. We go play together, as a team. Everybody's on the clock, and we go play together. And I recommend you come up with a budget, and maybe you assign 2 or 3 team members to be your committee that day to plan the activity. And they have to plan an activity that fits within the budget. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can do top golf. You could do bowling. You could do horseback riding. You could do mountain bike riding. We could play miniature golf. We could do an escape room. You could do, in some communities, you have that simulated skydiving, iFly. That's something that you could do. I even had an office that did a very cool thing. There was a restaurant in town that was open for dinner, but that's the only meal they're open for, and they open at 5 p.m. But in the early afternoon, they do private cooking classes. And so this is something they did with all the team. They did a private cooking class, a 3-hour private cooking class. And the team loved that. There's any number of variations that you can do. So how does this tie into calibration? Well, in some way, you could calibrate even simply in your morning huddle. Let me give an example of that. So remember, it's a 7-minute meeting, so we don't have a lot of time for that. But if one of the things we're working on is Google reviews, then we can have a short segment of our morning huddle that celebrates our success with Google reviews. Maybe we read a Google review that calls out some team members. That's a mild form of calibrating where we remind everyone how important our Google reviews are. But certainly we can include any calibration in our regular team meetings, but also in those semi-annual team meetings. Because if you do the 2-hour regular team meeting, it's going to give you enough time to do some training, to do some in-service work, to talk about, maybe the next team meeting. Let's follow through on the example that I used about going out and taking a Dr. Hornbrook smile design course. Maybe, Doctor, you and your assistant come back in the next team meeting and essentially debrief with everyone what you learned in Utah at Dr. Hornbrook's live patient smile design course. And certainly you can incorporate things like that into your semi-annual team meeting because of the amount of time that you're going to have to do that. Because calibration, again, is not a set it and forget it. It's not a set it and forget it. It's something that you're going to want to do in an ongoing way, and you always want to make sure you're calibrating. It's like if you slightly get off calibration, it can really affect the results that you see in your practice. And conversely, if you bring it back into alignment, mild, in a very subtle way, it can produce a significantly better result. And so that's really what team calibration is all about. And for those of you that say, I just don't have the time to do that, I'm going to ask you to think about Stephen Covey's concept of sharpening the saw. Because that one will, when you think about it that way, I think you realize you don't have the time to not do this. I know that was a double negative, but you don't have the time to not do this because of the consequences. Now let's bring this to systems calibration. We teach a concept of 24 systems for a thriving practice. Darren, let's ask our team to post the 2 Thriving Dentist Show episodes we did on the 24 systems. And we broke those down into part 1 and part 2 because there was so much content in there. So we have 24 systems for a thriving practice part 1 and 24 systems for a thriving practice part 2. We'll put those in the show notes. You can go to thrivingdentist.com, find this episode, and just scroll down. And you just click those. If you haven't listened to those, you can listen to those. And what happens with our systems, Naren, is they have a way of degrading naturally. It's no one's fault. I believe it's an element of human nature that systems have a way of degrading, partly because there's a dynamic in place for all of us. I believe, we all have this to some degree, where we have the shiny object syndrome. Naren, you know about the shiny object syndrome?
Absolutely, Gary. I think.
How would you characterize that? How would you define the shiny object syndrome?
Yeah, we get excited about an idea. Let's say we go to an event and we hear an idea, or we even listen to a podcast and we hear an idea. Instead of thinking it through and looking at all the other things we have to also take care of, this now gets on the top of the list, and then we don't stick with it. We forget about it in a week or two. Yeah. So then it just
we get distracted by this shiny object over here.
Yeah.
And the distraction may be a wonderful distraction, but meanwhile, it has a subtle way of eroding other things that we have in place in the practice because our attention is over here now instead of on the fundamentals. And let's face it, systems are fundamentals. They aren't necessarily sexy. They're not necessarily things that they're important, very important. But they're not necessarily, they fit the definition of the shiny new object, but they're very, very important. So here's my suggestion. As you put these 24 systems in place in your practice, a good pace would be to, if you were to say, come back to your team and say, hey, we're going to put all these in our practice in the next month, I can pretty much assure you the wheels will fall off because you'll be overwhelming. But a good pace would be to introduce 2 systems a month. 2 systems a month. That's a fairly quick pace because at the end of the year, you'd have all 24 systems in place. But it's also not so intense that it's going to cause the wheels to fall off. But then when you get all 24 systems in place, I want you to do an ongoing systems recalibration. And the way I would kind of frame this for you, you're all probably familiar with the Golden Gate Bridge out in San Francisco. We're all familiar with that. Here's something you might not know. There is a permanent crew of 12 painters whose job is to permanently paint the Golden Gate Bridge. Naren, they start at a certain point and they work their way around. And remember, the elements are harsh out there. Salt water, intense sun, wind. And so that paint is constantly being eroded. And as they work their way around the bridge, they get it all painted. And then at some point they get back to where they started. And guess what they do then? They repaint the bridge again. So they're on a permanent project of painting that bridge. Well, that's how you need to look at your systems. You can't simply put these 24 systems in place and set them and forget them, because they will evaporate. So think about being on the painting crew of the Golden Gate Bridge, and that's how you're going to do these systems. So in the first year, when you get them in place, what I want you to do every year thereafter is audit 2 of those systems, maybe in the same order that you put them in place, and then make any changes you need to, recalibrate them, dial them back in so they're calibrated ideally. And what the audit is, and the recalibration exercise is compare what you're currently doing against ideal and make any changes that you need to make to bring it back to ideal. And that's the process of calibrating your systems. And if you do 2 a month, it's very manageable. Those could be done during your team meetings. They could be done, also during those semi-annual meetings. And they can be simply fitted into the agenda of those meetings. And lo and behold, you'll have 24 systems that are always calibrated. Now you'll have a team that's fully calibrated and is really a high performance team running systems that are now calibrated. And now you'll have high performance systems. Well, I'm excited about sharing this with you. I hope I put it on your radar screen with the importance of getting your team and your systems calibrated. And if you feel like you're maybe in your mind, you're saying, Gary, I don't know how this happened. At one time, man, we were really firing on all cylinders, and now it's sort of gotten away from us. Just understand that you have a lot of company in that regard. That's normal. And the answer is to invest in sharpening the saw. Well, we've got some great questions coming up. Let's hit pause on the Coaching in Action segment, and we'll get to those questions in the Thriving Dentist Q&A segment.
Welcome back to the Thriving Dentist Q&A segment. Gary, I really enjoyed our topic today. I think it's very timely and I think it's very useful. It's one of those episodes where, just in a few minutes, you share so many nuggets that I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to apply some of these ideas in my business, Gary. So thank you for that.
Very cool.
Let me ask by asking 4 questions. The first one is it more effective to do my team calibration meetings by department or as a full team?
Great question. And my answer, as is the answer to many questions, it depends. It depends. Certainly, there's some things that we can do departmentally, and I don't have an objection to that. For example, one of our 24 systems, Naren, is all about really getting serious about diagnosing and treating periodontal disease through conservative periodontal therapy. That's one of our 24 systems. And by the way, what that means, we have a KPI associated with. Very often we have a KPI, a key performance indicator, associated with a system, because then we can measure how we're doing. And the way we measure that is ideally we want, in a typical practice with a typical age distribution, meaning that your patient ages are in a typical distribution, we'd like to see 30% of the adults that we see in hygiene being treated with conservative periodontal therapy treatment codes, like 4341, 4342, 4355, or 4910. 30%. Now, if I need to recalibrate, then I would probably start that exercise with my hygiene team and do the heavy lifting with the hygiene team. And then I would bring it back to the entire team as a summary, because your business team members are going to need to know about that, because they're going to have to, make financial arrangements. They're going to have to use codes when it comes to submitting insurance. So oftentimes it isn't one or the other. Do we do this departmentally or do it as a whole team? It's often both. It could be both, where we start with a department and kind of do the heavy lifting. And then once we get that worked out, then we bring a summary to the rest of the team. In some cases, we could do this all together as a team. For example, Google reviews would be one that we would do as an entire team because everybody plays a role in that one. Very good question.
Thank you, Gary. I really appreciate that answer. I have a second question for you. I know that I'm guilty of being so busy working in my practice that we rarely spend time working on my practice.
That Stephen Covey concept of sharpening the saw, right?
Yes. And it's such a balance, right? Just balancing between sharpening the saw and working in your business. How frequently should we do our team calibration meetings?
That is such a good question because it is a delicate balance. And my suggestion is that those can be incorporated in our regular team meetings. If you're following the format that I suggested of a regular team meeting every other week for 2 hours. And again, I'm going to lobby for that because it gives you a larger block of time. And if you're doing some in-service training, that larger block of time will make those in-service training more effective. For example, let's say we're going to now start to incorporate digital photos for patient education. By the way, one of the 24 systems is we use digital photos for patient education. We use Frank Spear's suggested 6 photos. These are digital photos, not intraoral photos. And maybe one of the things we have to do in calibration is train all of our team members to be able to take these photos. So that if we only have one person that can take those photos, then we could get to a situation where that person is not available, and then the whole system kind of collapses because we didn't have someone to do it. So if we're going to train the team, and in-service, this could be done in one of your team meetings, is we do an in-service where first we talk about how to take these photos, and then we practice taking photos on each other. And the doctor, and maybe whoever else is pretty competent at photos, can be workshop leaders. But we can do that. Now, that would be something that could be done very well in a regular team meeting. That's the type of thing that could also be done in our semi-annual team meetings. But I would suggest that instead of just having a team calibration meeting, it's something that we incorporate into our regular meetings because it's ongoing. Again, team calibration isn't set it and forget it, but it's something you want to do on an ongoing basis. So those can fit very nicely, in our regular team meetings. They can also fit very nicely in those semi-annual meetings. And believe it or not, they can also fit in the morning huddle by just saying, like, imagine the doctor saying, hey guys, you know how we've been talking about growing whitening? I want to take a minute and recognize the work that we've done. Our goal was to do at least 6 whitening procedures a month, and we have been hitting that regularly. Way to go. That's an example of team calibration because it's encouraging our team to do what we've set out to do. So it could be done in all 3 meetings in some way, shape, or form.
Let me ask you the third question, Gary. I have come to realize that systems I once had in my practice have deteriorated, and I plan to get them back in shape. What tips do you have to keep them from deteriorating in the future?
Well, welcome to the real world, Doctor. And I want to state that what you've described is very common. We see it happening all the time. And it's human nature. It's natural. There's no finger pointing. Let's face it, there's a lot of moving parts in a dental practice. And it's hard to keep everything optimized. So don't feel bad. But that audit that I suggested, your systems calibration, where after you get them in place, you go back and audit 2 a month, if you're following our 24 systems. And then the next year, it's the painting the Golden Gate Bridge analogy. You're not done. You just keep painting it again and again and again. And anyway, that's how I would suggest doing it. Remember what an audit is you look at what you're currently doing and you compare it to ideal. Let me give you an example of a way I noticed a system deteriorate recently in a client office. When we teach using digital photos for patient education, we take Dr. Spear's 6 digital photos for patient education, and rather than uploading those to a monitor, we upload those to a tablet. And the reason we do that is it makes the experience more interactive with the patient. If they're just looking at it on a monitor, it can be very passive and they can be not very engaged. But if we have it on a tablet that we put on their lap and the tablet is touchscreen and they can zoom, people really get into those photos. Well, in a client office, this happened recently. For some reason, we stopped using the tablet, this office did, and they uploaded them to the monitor instead. That was an example of how a system morphed. And I actually found out why that happened in the practice, because the team member that made that decision said, well, it took 2 steps to upload the photos if we're going to use the tablet. We've got to upload them to the server, of course, so we can connect them to the patient records. But now we have to upload them to the tablet, and we always run short on time. So I just decided to cut out uploading them to a tablet. Does that make sense, Darren? Can you see how a team member could make that decision?
Absolutely, Gary.
And so I was a coaching client. And so what I said to her was, this afternoon, I want you to go back to uploading them to the tablet. And I know it's an extra step, and I know it takes, a few more seconds that we don't have. But I want you to do it today. And I want you to notice how much more engaged the patient is when the photos are on the tablet. And then let's talk about it at the end of the day and tell me what you found. And she did just that. And at the end of the day, she said, oh my gosh, Gary, I totally get it. Such a different experience when it's on their lap and they can zoom in. I'll make sure we go back to that. That's an example of recalibrating a system. But really, this is the answer to that, is to have a regular method for auditing. So when we audit, we look at what we're currently doing compared to ideal. And in this example, what they're currently doing was uploading the photos to a monitor. Ideal was uploading to a tablet. And then you make the modification to get it back to ideal. So it's that auditing system that you do continuously. And 2 systems a month should be something you can easily manage.
Thank you, Gary. Let me ask the last question. How is the best way to onboard new team members and get them trained on our office systems?
So important today because so many offices have new team members. Very, very, very important. Well, again, we're going to incorporate any new team members into our meetings, whether it be the morning huddle, the regular team meeting, or the semi-annual team meeting. So make sure we do that. But one other thing I would do, and this tip is something we've done at Life Smiles and I've done in my client work, and it has been amazingly effective. And this kind of comes from the world of, the Greek system in college, the fraternity sorority system. Are you familiar with that, Naren?
Yes. I mean, I used to, live in a fraternity house during the summer months. So I was never part of the fraternity house.
Was yours Animal House?
No, I don't know what it was, but it was a long time ago, 25 years ago in Chicago.
Animal House is a classic movie from the late 1970s, and it was a rather errant fraternity. Anyway, 2 of my 3 daughters participated in the college Greek system in sororities and actually had a very good experience. And so we kind of borrowed a chapter from the sorority system. And one of the things I suggest is for every new hire, you assign a big sister. A big sister. And to be fully accurate today, it could be a big brother. We're seeing more and more, males in the dental workforce. But you assign a big sister or a big brother who is responsible for helping that team member integrate into your practice, helping them understand your culture, helping them understand what your value system is, helping you understand what the practice why is. And you have to pick their big sister, big brother, very specifically. You want someone that really gets what your practice is all about so they can accelerate a new team member to really fit in as productively as possible into your practice. We also did an episode, Naren, on Thriving Dental Show about onboarding new team members. Let's incorporate that into the show notes as well. We'll put a link there as well. But that's one of the things you can do with a new team member to help really get them on board with your systems, is to use the big sister concept so that person can accelerate that new team member's entry into your practice and learn how to really fit in. That might accelerate that whole process and have it happen a lot quicker. Well, hey, as we wrap up today, I hope you've enjoyed this episode all about team member and systems calibration. Just remember that we're never done. And I don't want you to treat that like a negative. Treat it as a positive, because we're always learning new things. It's a mindset that I've embraced in everything I do in my life. And that mindset is, I simply want to be better tomorrow than I am today. And that has to do with our team performance. It also has to do with our systems performance as well. And set the goal, not perfection, progress, not perfection. And set the goal of being better tomorrow than you are today. All right, as we wrap up this episode, some thank yous are in order. Naren, I want to take a minute and thank you helping me host the Thriving Dentist Show. I also want to thank our contributors, people like Dr. Eric Block and our contributors. They add a lot to the Thriving Dentist Show. We get great comments about the clinical tips that they offer as well. Naren, I also want to thank you and your team at Equa Digital Marketing, the marketing agency that we use at LifeSmiles, and also we recommend to our clients. We love how you contribute to our success by providing us with not only the number of new patients we need every month, but the quality of those new patients as well. So Naren, thanks to you and your team for being such an important part of a successful practice. I also want to thank all of our listeners. We couldn't do what we do. We love what we do, but we couldn't do it without you. Thank you for being a listener to the Thriving Dentist Show. If you haven't done it already, jump on iTunes and write us a review. It'll help more dentists find us when they're looking for dental podcasts. On that note, thank you for the privilege of your time, and Naren and I look forward to connecting with you on the next Thriving Dentist Show.